This is a clip from the Nintendo Village podcast, your weekly half-hour Nintendo show. For the full episode, check out the link in the description.
I saw a tweet, I can't remember who it was, but somebody just mentioned it on Twitter when E3 put out their latest statement about it, how they were monitoring the situation. And they basically said that if E3 gets cancelled because of coronavirus, then that could be the end of E3 because its attendances have been down year over year. They tried to rejuvenate it a bit by opening it up to the public. Obviously, PlayStation haven't been there last year or this year. Nintendo haven't done a stage presentation for, God, what was it, like 5-6 years now since they first moved to Direct. So the whole nature of E3 has changed. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on whether you think E3 has a future or what you think E3's future is. Because, I mean, you were probably the same as me, right? You're growing up, you read in the Nintendo magazines every June and you'd get the big blowout about E3 and it just seemed like Disneyland, right? It was just the gaming mecca where you always wanted to go and you never thought you would. I don't know about you, but it's part of the reason why I write about games and I do podcasts and things like that is because reading these journalists' accounts of E3 and playing Ocarina of Time and seeing Twilight Princess for the first time and things like that, like that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be the first guys to see those games and play those games. And it kind of makes me sad that it seems to be waning in recent times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a different time now, isn't it? Because all the good boys and girls get their news through NintendoVillage.com. So there's no need for these magazines anymore. A pox on them, and they're kind, except for Switch Player. Those are some nice people.
The NintendoVillage.com.
The NintendoVillage.com. Oh, did I get the URL wrong then? Oh,
you got the URL
God,
wrong.
That's terrible. We'll claim NintendoVillage.com just in case I make that mistake again. I think that E3 is something that used to work a lot in terms of how it was presented and how it was laid out. I don't think it makes sense for a business to do that anymore. Like, the stage shows cost so much money to rent out the place and get the props and all that stuff that I honestly think it's pointless. And I think that when Nintendo dropped out, I was actually happy because, let's face it, their cringe fest that they've had for the first couple of years leading up to them going to Directs was terrible. I know that a lot of people really like the stage shows. I just think it's an ancient, outdated way of getting that to people now. I think there's other ways. And I think, personally, I don't think E3 will end, but I think it'll be more like what we know as Gamescom and EGX and Insomnia, which are just basically big events for everyone, regardless of whether you're press or general public, to get your hands on games. And then if there's any ones that aren't ready for the public but are ready for the press, they have them behind a curtain, right? So yeah. I think that's pretty much the future of E3. So basically, if you've been to Gamescom or know about Gamescom, I think E3 will just be the bigger Gamescom now.
Yeah, so I actually agree with you on the stage shows. Like, I was always in the camp that I wanted Nintendo to come back and do stage shows again. Like, I loved the Directs and they were great, but I missed that, like, having that live reaction kind of thing. And then they had the live presentation for the Switch, and I was like, oh, like, it had its moments. Like, what's his face, like lying on the sofa playing, with the Koizumi lounge position, that was it. Yoshiaki Koizumi was just sort of like lying on the sofa playing Super Mario Odyssey, whatever it was. But you're right, it was like a lot cringy, if that's a word, and just like less polished. And after watching that, it made me appreciate Directs even more. And I was like, yeah, no, do you know what? I'm quite happy to just get Directs from now on. But yeah, I think I agree. I think if E3 does have a future, then it is more as like a fan convention, like a Gamescom or an EGX, something like that. Which, basically what they've been trying to pivot to recently, right? Is it 2 years now? I think it's been open to the public. But it's interesting because the big hook of E3 was always the announcements, right? And then, if you get to go there and play the games as well, that's like the big bonus. So it will be interesting to see if we still get, if everyone does pivot to Directs and we have a Nintendo Direct and PlayStation do a State of Play and we get an Inside Xbox thing, if they will still tie those in around E3, or whether or not it does just become a Gamescom or an EGX where there's no announcements or anything like that, but it's just an opportunity to play stuff.
I mean, there's also the damage that E3 does, which other people don't really talk about, right? But it does damage people at times. Like, we had the famous Final Fantasy VII thing with the PlayStation, and they revealed Final Fantasy VII, but it was a port of the original, and everybody was on the edge of the seat thinking, this is the remake, this is the remaster, and then no, it was the original one. And I think that panicked Square Enix into making a Final Fantasy remaster, which is the one that's coming out soon. And that got announced so early that everybody thought that they literally had scrapped it. And I think that it's easy to forget that it has a negative effect on companies as well as positive.
I think it can do, but I think it's a little bit harsh to lay that at the feet of E3. I think that's, and Nintendo guilt of it as well at times.
It's not E3 the venue's fault. No. It's definitely the messaging of the companies, but obviously they do that for E3. And I always feel that even the directs have had their blunders at times, but I don't think anything's as bad as E3 because expectations get set too high. I mean, look at Federation Force, right? That was actually a really good game, but people battered it so much because it wasn't the big Metroid that they wanted.
Yeah, and it was, I think, was that the same year that there was the big focus on Star Fox Zero?
I think it was, yeah.
And stuff, yeah. I remember that being a particularly poor E3 showing for Nintendo. But I think it was the last one before they started pivoting to Switch, to be fair. So, and I think you make a valid point in that, yeah, it could be the case that companies are pressured in or feel pressured into doing something, even if they don't necessarily have much to tell. And I kind of feel like that's why PlayStation weren't there last year, is because they announced all their games so far in advance that they didn't actually have anything new to talk about.
Yeah, and I mean, the funny thing is with PlayStation is they weren't at E3, but they were at Insomnia, which is a really, an early Insomnia in England, which is a really small festival. Yeah. And I think it's to get people's hands on, and that's what I mean. I think that E3 is a better place for people to get their hands on games than announced games now, I feel.
Yeah, and that's the key thing, isn't it? Because, in years gone by, you had E3 that all the press went to, the developers told the press everything, and then the press came away, wrote about it in the magazines, and told the audience, right? Mm-hmm. And now companies, they're just cutting out the middleman, and they're just telling their audience straight through directs on social media. And so, yeah, that we don't need that middleman anymore, and thus we don't need a big event centered around giving the message to the middleman. As much as, we as Nintendo Village are the middleman sometimes.
Yeah.
And there's still a role for it, but certainly in terms of those big events, yeah, with the internet and social media and all the rest of it, it is so much easier for the companies to take that messaging directly to the fans, if you can pardon the pun, where they can control the messaging.
Yeah, and I think that, one last thing I want to say about it, I think that E3 will always have its fond memories, and I think that even if it did come to an end, it's not the end. There will always be something else there to replace what E3 was, whether it is just these other shows, or maybe the Game Awards will start picking up some of the announcements, or something like that. But even if it does come to an end, right, I think that we should all appreciate exactly what E3 is and was. And to keep those memories for the better or the worse, right? Because the cringe is awesome to look back on now. It wasn't good at the time, but watching Wii Music now is so funny that it's ridiculous that they ever thought that was cool.
There's so many iconic moments, isn't there? From Reggie's "My Body Is Ready" to like you say, Miyamoto's conducting on stage. Yeah, there's so many great things like that. And you're right, it will be, whether it lives on in whatever form, it will always be a cornerstone of video game history, right?
Yeah, and so I suppose let bygones be bygones, if that's the right phrase for it, right?
Something like that, yeah. But hopefully E3 will stick around for a little while in some form or another.
Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe, check out some of our other videos, and visit thenintendovillage.com, your home for everything Nintendo.